Every WWDC, Apple wheels out a developer on stage during the keynote to gush about how lovely it was porting their 2-year-old game to the Mac. That one big title ships months late, and then it's radio silence until next June when they run the whole dog and pony show again. But this year was different because Apple didn't say jack squat about gaming. And yet they've quietly shipped their biggest upgrade to the Game Porting Toolkit since they launched the thing years ago. Which is interesting, because it also just so happens that the 3 excuses that I have granted Apple for why real gaming has never happened, 1, that the Mac simply can't do it, 2, that the competition is cheaper, and 3, that the CEO has no interest in a niche that he can't squeeze for services revenue, have all fallen apart at once. Which leaves exactly one thing standing in Apple's way, and that is Apple. But I've got a plan so crazy, it just might work. You may recall from last year's WWDC that Apple announced the jump from Metal 3 to Metal 4. Metal being the graphics API that game engines use to send rendering and compute commands to your GPU. Metal 4 brought with it a proper temporal upscaler, frame interpolation, which is Apple's own spin on NVIDIA's DLSS 3 frame gen, and denoising, which is particularly helpful if you're using ray tracing at lower resolution because it scrubs artifacting noise that can be left behind. This is pretty common on Macs. Now, most of these new features require an M3 or newer, with a few of these features requiring as new as an M5. But if you have that new hardware, well, the new Game Porting Toolkit can do you a real solid. Just like today's sponsor. I use AI almost every day for coding tasks, email, and more, and the irritating part is that no single model is the best at everything, so you end up paying for like 4 of them. And today's sponsor, Mammoth, fixes that by putting the best AI models in one place for one price. Claude, GPT, Gemini, Mistral, Grok, DeepSeek, the whole roster, all under a single login starting at under $10 a month. The thing I actually use it for is reprompting. You can ask the same questions across different models, you can compare their answers and let them challenge each other. And the end result is, well, you walk away with something far better than trusting just one of them on their own. There's lighter models for when you want a smaller footprint and quick responses, deep research for when you need something more detailed, and you can drop in documents and images, PDFs, spreadsheets, screenshots, whatever. Now, in privacy, which I actually care about, your prompts are not stored or used to train anything. It is GDPR compliant as a European outfit, and you can wipe your history whenever you want. One subscription, every Frontier model, no vendor lock-in. The link is in the description below. That is Mammoth AI. Like Proton for Linux, GPT-K can be used to take a Windows game's DirectX 11 or 12 calls and rewrite them in real time into Metal that the Mac can actually run. And in addition to the handy new MetalFX features we just discussed, there's a decent uplift in performance just from framework optimizations and new efficiencies gained by virtue of updating to macOS 27 Golden Gate. And I was honestly shocked at these improvements. And I was shocked at how well everything ran despite being run on my base model M5 MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM. This is not an M5 Pro, it's the regular cheapest MacBook Pro you can buy, the bare M5. Now, to get things running, you do need to register for a free Apple developer account, grab the GPT-K evaluation environment since it's still in beta, install Crossover, and then swap out the old GPT-K folders for the new ones. That's the gist anyway. There are more detailed instructions linked below. But the jump to GPT-K 3 to 4 is much bigger than I ever expected. Take Red Dead Redemption at 1080p, cranked to ultra settings with DLSS enabled. On macOS 26, the game would just hard crash within seconds of being launched at this graphics preset. I suspected this might have been from the puny 16 gigs of RAM on my M5 MacBook Pro, but by upgrading to macOS 27, that notion was dispelled because while the game still kind of ran like crap, using the old GPT-K 3, I was able to get it to run, just not in a playable state. It was about 14 frames per second on average. But then I tried it again using GPT-K 4, the same game, the same settings, and it leaped to 38 frames per second average with peaks touching 80. And while it's an older title, ultra settings on this game are still quite demanding, and the final result is beautiful. The previous version of macOS was able to hold a flat 60 at high settings, but GPT-K 4 really unlocks that upper end, those ultra presets. Kingdom Come Deliverance II sings much the same tune. It's frankly unplayable at ultra settings on macOS 26. But if I update to macOS 27, I get a workable 33 frames per second, even with the old toolkit. And when I update to the new one, well, that becomes a buttery smooth 47 frames per second at ultra. Look, I know PC fans are gonna say, buttery smooth, 47 frames? If you drop things down to high, it looks visually almost the same, and you can pretty well hold 60. No, we're not going to like reinvent the world here, but just think about that. Going from basically unplayable to really quite serviceable with no new chip, no new hardware, just the toolkit and OS update, that's really impressive. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this extends to every game and that every game gets a red carpet treatment. I keep doing this because I'm pointing and alluding to Cyberpunk 2077. There is no uplift to that game using GPT-K4. Then again, there's also a Mac native port of that game, so what does it really matter? And then there's other times where you're really reminded of the beauty and the curse of translation layers. They can work with every game, but it also doesn't really work with every game. Any Steam Deck owner knows the cope. And at least on the Steam Deck, you could smell that delicious exhaust coming out of that sweet, sweet vent. Not so on the Mac. The Last of Us is one such cautionary tale. While GPT-K4 posts theoretically fine frame rate numbers, it's not playable. It hitches every couple of seconds badly enough to make the game just tremendously bad. And there is no fix for it, and there hasn't been for a while. But these are frankly less common than the games that bring you genuine surprise. 007 First Light, a brand new, fairly demanding game, held a rock-solid 30 FPS at 1080p Ultra, higher when sacrificing some lighting and texture qualities. Now, actually getting it to launch on this machine was a challenge, a constant game of killing background processes so that the thing doesn't run out of memory, but I would bet that Crossover patches that soon because it reads to us more like a memory leak than a real memory shortage. The game does launch eventually, but yeah, for reference, my Steam Deck wheezes through that game at the same, well, no, not the same resolution, at a lower resolution to 800p versus 1080p with a sub 30 FPS average on low settings with FSR pinned in performance mode. Like the M5 is way more performant than the Steam Deck. An iPad chip can lap a now admittedly dated, but similarly priced dedicated gaming handheld. Pretty amazing. No, as mentioned earlier, this is not going to win you any awards. A lot of these games lean on frame generation and temporal upscaling to even uphold their not that impressive numbers, but that's also kind of just gaming now. Have you seen the new Steam machine? I mean, we've crossed the point of meaningful year-on-year graphic gains ages ago. New games barely look better than the ones that came before them, and the whole industry has shifted to squeezing more performance out of the silicon that we already own. Old hardware keeps getting pushed further and further every year, and translated games here do much the same thing. There is one more interesting piece of the GPT-K4 that I think is worth mentioning, and it's one that I think might matter the most down the line. It does admittedly live mostly on the developer side, either for the game developers themselves who are supposed to be porting their apps, or more likely to the folks at CodeWeavers who are doing most of the work for Apple to get unsanctioned games to run on their platform. It is a set of open source agentic coding skills, giving LLMs the ability to capture, debug, and profile Metal workloads directly. And maybe this is the AI optimist in me, but if an agent can carry a port most of the way to the finish line, you're no longer stuck on Hideo Kojima waiting to bring you one nice looking title every 3 years. You'll start getting the weird older niche stuff that nobody was going to hand port to this platform anyways because it's too small. There's no people. That's the part that I think might actually move the needle. All right, so here's the plan I teased, the crazy one. Apple stops pretending that the iPhone and the Mac are gaming machines, and they just build an actual gaming machine, like a dedicated gaming device, a handheld or an Apple TV-sized home console, or frankly, both, running a plain base M-series chip, playing the library that you already own through that translation layer that they've already spent a lot of time and energy on, and seeding a real game store underneath the whole thing for the future. I know how that sounds, okay? So let me just take the objections in order that they are received because, well, there's going to be a lot of them. Let's start with the most obvious thing. Why would Apple build any of that when they've already got the Mac and the iPhone? I mean, these things already exist. Well, first off, the Mac, while now competent at gaming, you could say, isn't really excellent at gaming given its price. I mean, the MacBook Air, even with an M5, now starts at $1,100, and you got no active cooling. You'll find better performance out of a multi-year-old PC for less dough, even if it's big and ugly and heavy. As for the iPhone, well, despite all the gaming that does happen on it, remember, mobile has over 50% of the total gaming industry's revenue. Phones are still not really gaming handhelds, despite what Apple might want it to be. For one, it's store-gated, so everything that you want on this platform has to come through the App Store, and a lot of things don't. Fortnite, anyone? It's back, but you know what I mean. And it's also the one computer that you carry with you everywhere. It holds your keys, your identity, your wallet. You can't just have a game draining the thing to death. You get yanked out of matches by messages and notifications, and at the end of the day, Well, it's running a phone chip that's tuned for blistering single-core performance at tiny power budgets, because that's what a phone needs, not what gaming needs. So what I say is, ditch all that. In this new gaming handheld thing, you just accept that it's going to live on a desk or in a bag instead of in your pocket. And then you can fit within it a dedicated fan with a beefy SoC, plus a bunch of other cheaper components to bring the cost down. A high refresh LCD or OLED that doesn't need to be reference grade in terms of color accuracy. You would be shocked at how much Apple pays for their fancy screen. Just put something cheap in there. You're playing video games, man. You don't need fancy cameras or modems or coprocessors because you're just playing video games on it. You'd get dramatically more performance for dramatically less money. You get the SoC and you cheap out on everything else. Now, there is this perception, and it's wrong, by the way, that M-series chips are way more expensive than A-series chips. That, well, you could put an M1 in it and sell it at a cheap price. Look at the MacBook Neo. That's cheap, but it has a phone chip. You see, that base M5 in my MacBook Pro, it's the same chip as is found on my iPad Pro, which is the same chip that will be found in a future iPad Air, all cheaper devices. And it's built on the same 3nm process as the A19 found in the iPhone 17. And the thing about chip economics is that fabricating a wafer costs roughly the same no matter how many chips you slice out of it. The money is in the fabrication steps, not the die count. So a bigger chip like an M5 does cost more money because your yield is lower, but not multiples more expensive. It's a modest premium. To put real numbers on it, assuming a 300mm wafer size, the A17 Pro only yields a 30% gross die count increase over the M5. And because Apple is so vertically integrated, the chip isn't even the priciest part in the box anymore. The display costs more, almost always. The material and processing costs on the aluminum is also more expensive, and the list continues. Now, back when Apple was buying from Intel, the processor was the single most expensive component in a Mac, but now it's well down the list, which means a base M5 class chip in a $700 gaming box that cheaps out on the display and a bunch of other stuff, it's not some margin-destroying fantasy. It's very doable. And there's two more things that stack in Apple's favor. First, that M5 carries 16 gigs of unified memory, one shared pool, the exact architecture that the Switch 2 and other modern handhelds are moving towards because it's cheaper, it's more power efficient, and you never sit on idle, walled-off resources. But second, there's also cooling. You see, fans are just expected in these gaming handhelds and console-like devices. And older, cheaper chips with a fan will almost always outperform and beat the performance of a newer chip that's running without. And in instances like a desktop box, where power efficiency is less of a concern, well, you can achieve better cooling and milk extra performance out of an older chip by just increasing the TDP and using a fan, where Apple would never run a fan in an iPad. They could totally run it in a gaming-focused device. Fans are cheaper than fancy silicon. Now, if you doubt that Apple can ship a cheap, competent piece of hardware at a profit, look again at the MacBook Neo. Yes, it's using an A18 Pro, but again, we discussed it, not that much cheaper. It is a laptop that is reliable, it is well built, it runs forever on a charge, and it still leaves Apple a healthy margin. And that's in spite of the fact that we've seen every other gadget skyrocket in price. Of course, this is all thanks to AI data centers inhaling DRAM. Prices jumped like 90% in a single quarter. AI is on track to eat a fifth of all DRAM production this year, and nobody expects this to get better before 2028. I mean, the Steam Deck that I bought 2.5 years ago is 40% more expensive today than what I paid for it back then. The Switch 2 is selling at a loss, one of just 3 instances in Nintendo history, the other 2 being the 3DS and the Wii U. But both of those launched to super underwhelming reception. Not true of the Switch 2, which is the fastest selling console in history. And premium PC handhelds? They're all sitting north of $1,000, and well, so is the new Steam machine. What I'm trying to say is, even if the market were to correct, something like the Switch 2, currently the best value in handhelds dollar for dollar, is something that Apple could absolutely murder if it decided to show up. But a cheap, powerful box, it's only half the pitch. The other half, the part that turns a gadget into a platform and into real recurring money, is the store. And right now, the way Apple has chosen to have you buy games on the Mac is just a total poop show. Some titles are on Steam. Some titles are on the Mac App Store. Some titles are on both. And there is no standard expectation for any of the things that make a gaming platform feel like one. There's no guaranteed save syncing. There's no crossplay. There's no consistency anywhere. It is a mess. And it is a mess that Apple built for itself because the Mac App Store sucks. It's built on the old bones of iTunes. It is not built to support modern games. Some of the very demos that Apple showed at WWDC never gave Apple $1 because devs wouldn't publish on their crappy store. They just went to Steam instead. So here's the move. And it starts with a concession that Apple will hate to make. Just let people bring the games they already own. Almost anybody who would be interested in an Apple game widget to faff about on has already dabbled in PC gaming and might have a library sitting on Steam, and they want that to come with them. I certainly do. So take the really great translation layer that you've already built, which can play an enormous number of Windows games, get CodeWeavers, the geniuses behind Crossover, to build to use a bunch of money to build out a catalog of verified games, just like the Steam Deck does, and then let people sideload their existing catalog on day one without devs needing to do any work. You instantly make your platform attractive. And yeah, it won't all be perfect at launch, neither was the Steam Deck, but the verified catalog has been enough to get people to buy in, and that's all you need to start. Now, the fantasy version is that Apple walks over to Valve, builds a custom skin on top of Steam, and then puts it on top of the Game Porting Toolkit, and then cuts some sweetheart deal where Valve takes like 10% instead of the usual 30%, and then Apple takes the rest, and then they work together to have a game platform. That's not happening, okay? Apple wants its cheddar, and I don't think that Valve wants to play ball either. Fine. Build a native game store that actually is compelling, that must compete with lower fees than Steam or Epic, cross-platform saves, the kind of tight integration that makes multi-platform gaming great in the first place. And people might naturally come to your store because it's better to use. I mean, the Steam Deck is a tiny platform by the raw numbers, tiny. And yet the vast majority of games now ship already tested and verified for the Steam Deck, with controller mapping baked in, because the industry understands that even though that's a really tiny market share, those people actually care. They're the ones buying games, and that's the whole thing. Get the numbers flowing, and the publishers will show up on their own at a later date. So, why hasn't any of this happened? Well, because pulling it off takes two things to happen in the same person at the same time. The conviction to make a real hardware bet and a reason to want the services platform sitting underneath it. And Tim Cook has only had half. His whole legacy is services. It's right there in the Succession announcement, foregrounded as the headlining feature of his tenure. And look, I love Apple services. I pay for music and TV and arcade, but let's be honest about what services actually means on Apple's balance sheet, because it ain't Ted Lasso. The App Store's 15 to 30% cut and roughly $20 billion a year that Google pays Apple to be the default search engine, that is what makes up the lion's share of Apple's services revenue. It's friend-seeking, plain and simple, asking for free money because you made a platform 15 years ago. It's all sitting underneath a regulatory microscope because of that same thing on both sides of the Atlantic. In that, if you want to be on iOS, you have to go through the App Store. Apple is the only door. So here's the obvious objection. Well, wouldn't a new handheld with its own game store create exactly the same problem, that Apple builds a storefront and takes its cut, rinse and repeat? No, because as long as Apple does the one thing that it refuses to do on the iPhone, it will be fine. And that is make it feel and work like a Mac. On the Mac, Apple competes for that software. Poorly, I might add, because as we discussed, the Mac App Store sucks, but it competes instead of mandates. However, if Tim Cook could have the Mac be like the iPhone, he would. I think the only reason it hasn't, and it isn't, is because it's so old and ancient. But every new platform since, watchOS, visionOS, iPadOS, they are all under this same umbrella. And for as much as I like Tim Cook, I think it's one of his worst decisions during his tenure as CEO. Apple has made their products worse to protect revenue, rather than make them better in hopes that revenue would increase. They've chosen not to compete, and it's a bummer, which makes September 1st, is that the day? Yeah, the best day of the year. All the more exciting. John Ternus will be taking over as CEO. And Ternus, he's a hardware engineer to his bones, above all else. He's got the exact half that Cook never did, the instinct to actually build a thing. And he's taken over a services business that, thanks to Cook, exists, but also thanks to Cook and courts, needs a new leg to stand on. Both halves finally in a person. Oh, John Ternus, we love you, buddy. Now, I already know that one of you is in the comments saying, a gaming console is too niche for Apple to consider, but will you look at what Ternus is reportedly building inside of Apple right now? A tabletop robot that spins a screen around your kitchen, a new smart hub with a screen and with Face ID, and then a doorbell with face recognition as well. That is some genuinely weird niche stuff that Apple may well be betting on for the next few years. And I'm supposed to believe that, a games machine, that's the far-fetched one. No, gaming isn't even niche. The Switch has moved over 150 million units on famously weak hardware, and the Switch 2 has moved 20 million units in a year. If you want actual niche, the Apple Vision Pro has sold maybe 500,000 to 600,000 units total. And they keep cranking out the HomePod, which has never cracked more than a few % of the total smart speaker market share, and they're said to be building a new one with a screen anyway, so give me a break. They could totally do this. Not everything Apple makes needs to be the iPhone, and frankly, most of their recent stuff isn't. None of their recent stuff is. Nothing has been the iPhone since the iPhone. A gaming device doesn't have to even reinvent anything. It just needs the Apple sauce. iCloud handoff so that you can have your saves follow you, or what about if you were able to pause gameplay and resume in the exact same spot somewhere else? Oh, that would be amazing. AirPods that seamlessly switch in between devices, AirPlay so that you can throw it onto your Apple TV. I've got tons of free ideas for you, Apple. Just let me know. You can make this thing cool. The glue is the whole reason that AirPods and the Apple Watch even matter. They work so cohesively. And unlike a robot speaker, a gaming platform, presumably, will come with the opportunity for recurring revenue to be baked right in, which is the one thing that Apple claims it wants most. For the first time in like a decade, I'm not even begging Apple to make this thing happen. I'm just waiting for them to see if they finally will, because all the pieces are aligned, the stars are ready. I'm ready. Are you? Come on, John. Sounds weird to say that. Come on, John Apple. Do us a solid. Make this thing. Can you imagine? The iSteam Deck, iJack, iPad, the Apple Game. Apple Game. There you go. Free name. Apple's so bad at naming stuff, it'll probably be worse. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay snazzy.